try and only do it in
Might have to
critical
switch
times.
chairs. Maybe we could switch chairs to them.
Let's take a vote.
You're gonna make the owl crazy.
Yeah, it's,
Try that.
yeah, better,
Go relax there.
except that it's low.
Okay, you ready?
Oh, yeah.
All right, welcome everyone to our Whitefish Community Development Board meeting for the growth policy. It's June 18th, 2025, and it's 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and begin. We have an agenda for tonight that has a couple of items on it. But first we'll start with general public comment, and we may have some people coming in from online also. So if anybody has a general public comment for something that's not on the agenda tonight, so water quality or hazards, go ahead and speak now. I'm guessing you two guys are here with specific items in mind.
Yes.
All right, anybody online, general comment?
Think so. Anybody online that wants to comment, raise your hand.
We have a full board here tonight, and is Mallory with us?
Yep, she's online, yeah.
All right. Sounds good. So we'll go ahead and start with our water quality goals and objectives. And we'll first turn to Alan to give us a presentation on this.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Alan T. from Block Long Range Planner with Whitefish.
You can share your screen.
Oh, it was. Did it go away? Let's see.
Guess so.
I thought. Oh, okay, let me try it again. It was sharing. What happened?
Okay.
All right, let me try sharing again. The. It was working. I don't know why it's not on me. Let's see. In a second.
There you go.
You get it now? Okay, so real quick, I wanna refresh on this. I gave these couple of slides at the last city council work session because there's just been so much discussion about water growth policy in our community plan. So it's a policy document. What it really is the visions, the values, and the official positions of the city. These are the policies and the priorities that drive future regulations, work programs, standards, funding. So some of the questions it'll say is, who are we? What do we want to be? What do we value? How do we grow? What should our goals and strategies be? I say that because this isn't a scientific or a financial study. It's not a hazard mitigation plan. In general, what happens is that each section has a narrative. It could be a paragraph or it could be several pages, depends on the community plan. Existing conditions, and then there'll be goals and objectives to address that narrative. Many cities will just have one paragraph on that topic. We decided moving forward that any goal and objective that we had, we were going to have some narrative to try to justify that so that you could understand why that goal objective came about. So that's why ours is more detailed. Here's an example. A goal: maintain and improve water quality of the Whitefish areas, the lakes, rivers, groundwaters, and streams. And then a typical objective, and this is the one I actually took directly. No land maintenance, land disturbance, private or public shall cause soil erosion, chemical contamination. So I'm not gonna read the whole thing verbatim, but that is an objective. And then there could be an action that comes out of that. Maybe saying, update the city's stormwater regulations to XYZ. So the narrative supports this goal and objective. The reason why I said it is because it's not necessary to have a write-up on any potential contaminant that could possibly be in the water. If it's meeting the goal and the objective, because I've gotten comments about all the different types of PCBs. I mean, some of them are trace contaminants. And is it really necessary to put that in the growth policy? It's all, again, just about goals and objectives. So going to the water quality section. So this is part of the environment, natural resources, and hazards elements. Just one section. When we first started on this, we met with the Whitefish Lake Institute in May 2024. So long before we started, we met with Mike and talked about this. had about an hour and a half meeting with him. He gave us all the different things that he thought that this should address. And based upon that, we incorporated all those issues and we did that write-up. So staff worked on this for several months. It went around to all the planners. They all made their corrections. Then it went around to all the different departments in the city. So Craig, Public Works was one of the different departments, finance, police, fire. They all made their comments and then we incorporated those comments into a revision and then we sent that revision out to different agencies that were all experts. And I've listed here what all those different agencies are. And then all those different agencies made their comments and we incorporated all of their comments or listed where we didn't. And then we sent that out for public review. And that went out to everybody, 550 people on the Engage Whitefish site for a period of 10 days, I think. And then any comments that we got, one in particular that was a really one we didn't think about that was excellent, was talking about fireworks. We didn't really think about the effects of fireworks on water quality. So that's a perfect example. I got that comment. We did some research. We looked at what the resolution was, some of the discussion with city council, and we incorporated that into the new draft. And once all of that was done, those different versions, that final draft came to you. So we first presented the environment section to the board December 19th, and it was discussed very briefly, but that was the time when it was decided there just wasn't enough time to talk about these sections. So it was continued until March. And then in March, we received two different versions of rewrites, mostly goals and objectives on this water quality section from one of the board members. We've received 3 more versions, so we have roughly 5 versions. Some somewhat similar, some differences. But we have concerns with the comments, and the reason why is we believe that many of these suggested additions are duplicative, unenforceable, require resources the city does not have, or they're within the purview of other different agencies. And although no action was taken on these comments at the March work session, the board moved to put this back on the agenda today at the June 18th, 2025 work session. So the most recent comments that we have comprise 9 pages, and those are all included with your staff packet. And these are the general topics: reorganization of the water quality section, requirement for the city to perform scientific studies with specific requirements regarding what needs to be included in periodic reports, requirement for establishment of a water quality information center, requirement to track 303D compliance. That's something under the EPA Clean Water Act. Requirements regarding failing septic systems, including updating public records, regulations to inspect septic systems with sale of property, criminalization of septic systems greater than 40 years old, some pretty specific requirements for golf courses, and a requirement to move fireworks off of Whitefish Lake. Due to the extent of these changes from what was initially prepared and reviewed, our significant concerns are because it was suggested that WLI was consulted in the writing of these goals. We forwarded these to WLI and talked about them. WLI stated that they had met with this, they had had consultation, but they had discouraged most of these goals, and that they had actually supported the draft that staff had worked on with them. Following this correspondence, we made some additional revisions to incorporate as many of those proposed recommendations as we could. And we made some additional recommendations from WLI, which were really just specifically just some crediting WLI and some of the actions that were taken. We forwarded those to WLI, who said that they were supportive of the most recent version of staff. If you look at the first version that was in your packet, we red marked what we suggest would be those. One of them talks about, it's kind of a general idea to be a little more clear to partner with Whitefish Lake Institute to address some water quality. There's a general goal about identifying and mitigating septic leachate contamination. There was a comment about, there was an original recommendation to do septic systems with sales of properties, but we are not involved with property sales. But we are involved with annexations. So if somebody that's on septic wants to annex into the city, we can require a septic system to be inspected prior to that. So we did add that. There was a comment about aging systems and incentives, and they had a period of 30 years, but it's actually 20 years. That's what matches a special improvement district. And then there was some general language about when there's recreational fields, because there was a discussion about whether we wanted to just pick on golf courses or whether we wanted to also talk about soccer fields and all those other that use the same kind of fertilizers as the golf course. So we made it more general for recreational fields owned by the city, but leased to another entity. You can read that if you want. So with that, I'll stop. We've given you what we recommend And then after this discussion, we can move on to the next one. So that's it on water quality.
All right, thank you, Alan. So now we'll go on to public comment. If anybody has specific comments on the water quality section, please let us know.
I do, and I don't know exactly where it's gonna fit, but, and maybe what you just brought up, Alan, it's gonna cover it. But, I have yet to see anything. I know that water quality, DEQ, has water quality information from the discharge from BNSF. And, that data is, I'm assuming, available to see whether that they are in attainment or not, on their discharge permits. And that's been going on, I think, since 2015. The reason I bring it up is because I saw them testing water today. The private contractor testing the wells. But no one has ever tested the outfalls, and just to take a graph sample, and I think that might be relevatory, but, anyway, I'd like to see something in there to discuss water quality and the DEQ reports. And it might be something so general as to say that in the goals and objectives is to monitor the annual report from DEQ of the discharges at the test wells from the railroad.
Craig, you have any, I brought Craig along because
So they have two discharges. One, obviously, they're discharging to groundwater. You know, any drop of water that hits the ground that doesn't get captured and go into their stormwater management system goes to groundwater. The city of Whitefish is not a regulatory agency for groundwater. I think we could put some language in there that will monitor it, but I mean, again, it's outside of the scope of what the city of Whitefish does. They do also have a stormwater.
it's not in our city limits either, is it? Pretty sure they're not even in Whitefish, they're incorporated by the county.
Discharge, so they have a stormwater pond that collects any water that goes into an inlet or their storm sewer collection system. That they do have to sample before discharging to the Whitefish River, and they have a permit for that.
But what I'm talking about is, I see pipes, 6-inch pipes coming from the road system in the rail yard. And if we get the heavy rain that we're expecting this weekend, those pipes are gonna be pumping some pretty ugly looking water, directly into the river. And, that concerns me. And the fact that, yes, Burlington Northern right of way is really in the county, but the river runs through it. And if you look at the hundreds of kids that are now jumping off the bridge, at this time of year, they're affected by that water. And I think we have a responsibility. And I'd like to see it addressed.
Yeah, don't have.
Just a question, if we did monitor and we found that they were out of compliance, I mean, Craig, what would our,
We don't have any regulatory arm over that. You
yeah,
would have to contact DEQ for them to report. Whitefish River is a water body of the state of Wisconsin, not, this is Montana. Jesus, God.
I've done that in years.
Jeez.
It's only been a decade, Montana.
It's not like this anymore, but than
Well, and so, I mean, sure, we could look at the report and we could tell DEQ that they're out of compliance, but DEQ would be the one that would have to enforce that.
don't they have to do that when they get their permit
or when they get the report, right?
every year? I mean,
Yeah, you would think so. So I mean, we're basically just overlapping what DEQ would be doing.
So if I
I'm
understand
sending
you,
to Wisconsin.
if I understand you correctly, Richard, what you're saying is that this discharge is not currently monitored.
Well, it's not reported.
It's not reported.
That we're.
That we're aware of. I think if somebody searched DEQ, BNSF rail yard which I tried to do. And it is a rabbit hole that you'll never escape from.
So my concern is if we're not tracking it somehow, how would we ever know to let DEQ know that there was a compliance issue so that they could continue their, whatever their process is? Not without us trying to enforce it, but just to make sure that DEQ knows.
I just think it deserves some recognition in our growth policy and growth plan.
Well, could we,
There's,
could we, put it in the policy or some recommendation that we hire a water quality company? There's one in Kalispell, I know, and, just have them go out, check it once a year, twice a year. And if they come up with a report that says this is outside of specifications or outside of limits that can be, we hand that report over to DEQ.
Well, so BNSF is already required to do that. I don't think the city has the authority to hire a private company to go to BNSF and sample their wells. I feel like the suggestion is, I mean, so the city reviews all sorts of permits, right? Building permits, excavation permits. It would be like DEQ should review the city building permits in case they're out of compliance with something that DEQ would regulate. I mean, I don't know, I guess I don't have an issue having language in the growth policy about the fact that BNSF has a regulated stormwater permit, but to have the city monitor that on an annual basis just seems like a level of discussion.
so I think there's an important point to be made here. The DEQ, the feds, the county, they have primary responsibilities in several areas here. The city has a secondary responsibility, certainly to be informed and maybe try to push these other agencies to act. The city does have the power under the law that if Whitefish Lake receives pollution, for example, the city has definite standing to bring a water quality trespass case. Or a case under the HELD decision, the recent climate decision, which basically says that the Constitution, Article 2, Section 3, right to a clean and healthful environment, is self-executing, meaning you can bring an action on that. So if there's damage to water quality, I think the city of Whitefish would have standing with regard to the Whitefish River or the lake. So that's a discretionary matter. It's up to the city whether it wants to do that, but it does have the power to do it. And so I think it's important to monitor, to track things. In my comments, I'm not suggesting that the city spend a lot of money on doing tests itself, but to track what others are doing and bring it into one place and make it public so that people know, so that the city knows, and so that the city can maybe push the DEQ or perhaps with less probability of success, push the county to do something. So that's there.
So now we're possibly out of general public comments and more gonna turn to board discussion. Does anybody else from the public have a comment on this specific thing? Okay, so we'll go ahead and start.
Was I clear on my concern?
You were clear, and now we have to find a way, from my perspective, to incorporate what you're requesting and what the board has prepared and some comments that have already been submitted to incorporate this into something that fits in a growth policy that will drive going forward a policy of knowledge from my perspective, not necessarily saying that we will monitor or we will take immediate action, but just somewhere in that step, we need to be informed. If testing's being done and it does affect water in the city of Whitefish, some way to gather that information in case something further needs to happen. So from my perspective, that's kind of where we need to discuss these suggested comments, suggested alterations to the staff report and come up with something that works going forward in a growth policy, just for the goals and objectives at this point.
I think there's a reason nothing green grows.
I would guess, yeah, probably, I'm sure that there's some things being sprayed and, they want to keep weeds down and whatever, but also there may be more to that, so it would be nice and it may be something that public could know without the city intervening. There may be a way, but that, yeah, so.
I mean, it seems to me that, again, we're talking about goals and objectives here. Something to the effect of, one of our goals might be set up systems or ensure systems in place so that the testing that needs to be done out of the rail yard or any other place is in fact being done, or something to that effect.
Results for-
Consistent with a goal that we could act on as we're able to. And it's not specific saying, okay, you gotta hire 3 people and you gotta do this and you gotta do that. The goal is, ensure there are systems in place that are monitoring outflows into the river and the lake.
Well,
Okay,
good.
we'll figure that out. We figure that out at some point. And the nice thing about this growth policy is that it's not like our prior growth policy to some degree. Once this thing is put in place, we're gonna have to draft and make those systems happen in fairly short order to begin to implement those goals and objectives. So this is not something that's gonna sit on a plate, but I think in terms of what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, what we could do is say, one of our goals and objective is ensure that there are systems in place that are monitoring, outflows into the river and, ensure that those are being done. And whatever those systems look like, I don't know. But I think that's something for a policy, but that seems to be a solution, or I offer that as what I've heard.
As a goal, I like that, and then with an objective, I think we could be a little more specific as far as communication with BNSF or, timing of that. And then from there into an action
Yeah.
plan during implementation.
If we were gonna go that route, I'd say this is more an objective. We've already got a really relatively overarching goal about reducing contaminants and all this. This is more, this kind of specificity is an objective.
That's step.
Goals
like a concrete
very
step.
broad. Don't,
Okay,
and then, discourage or whatever, monitor. Is the city of whatever I have here. So, I'm sorry, there's just so much.
Let's find this.
Right.
goal.
Maintaining improved water quality in whitefish areas, lakes, rivers, groundwater, and streams, that's a goal.
okay.
And then this would be an objective, but again, I guess,
Under that goal,
then this would be an objective under that goal.
okay,
Again, I gotta defer to Craig, because this is falling on his lap,
yeah, no,
right? This, Craig and Angie, like Angie would know maybe what the legal stuff is, this is falling on Craig's lap. He's gonna be the one that's gonna have to do this, or his department, that's why I'm saying I assigned this. I don't know what that looks like, so that's. It's easy enough to write an objective,
do we not want to do that?
I feel like we do. I think the specific comment about BNSF, city doesn't have an arm to ensure
No,
No.
that they're doing,
right, and I
rely on state agencies.
right, but what I'm hearing is, and I think we probably do some of this anyway, but I think a goal could be ensure that there are systems in place that are monitoring. And you're telling me that we do that. And so I think we could, but I think having that as an objective says, okay, go ahead.
Well, the only comment I have is, we're very close to being an MS4. And, I mean, aren't we having to, when we do that, we're gonna have to map, and then we'll be the city, but when we moved it, and there's some discussion about MS4 and the public facility, which you haven't seen yet, but you will. Part of that is gonna be requiring us having to map outfalls. Anyway, so isn't that required when you get to the MS4?
Yeah, those are city outfalls. Those are
Okay,
outfalls
those are
coming from city streets.
But some of those outfalls, the one on Edgewood is a combination of the rail yard and Texas, Wisconsin, and everything else. I mean, that's a huge outfall, that is a combined,
Well, it's a swell that runs along Edgewood. I don't know how much runoff that takes from the rail yard. A lot, okay, whatever amount, I watch it.
And what we're talking about is monitoring, right? Richard? I mean,
well, I think the public, you monitor and inform the public. I think those are the two things that I would like to see, as part of the growth policy plan under, improving, maintain and improve water quality of the Whitefish areas, lakes, rivers, White's called the Fish River, groundwaters and streams.
What are we monitoring specifically then? Cause I'm just trying to come up with the language. Ensure systems are in place to monitor what?
Outfalls?
And you have two things, you have surface water and you have groundwater. Those are two different things. Am I correct? Yeah, so like in a big rainstorm, that's the surface water that sheets off of there.
But where? Are we only talking about BNSF? That's a huge monitoring studies, I'm saying. I'm just trying to think of poor Craig out there monitoring. I'm just trying to make this work. If we're gonna put this in the growth, I have no objection to any of this. I just, if we put it in there, we have to figure out a way to do it. And to make it right, that's my concern. I have no vested interest, other than if I put it in there, we have to figure out how to do it.
it has
I
to
don't
be
wanna make a
achieved.
promise, I don't wanna make a promise that we can't do.
Is BNSF mandatorily reporting this to DEQ?
Yeah.
So is that something that's available to the public?
Yeah, I don't think you can just go on the website and find it, but it's open record.
It's public record. So do we want to compile something in a city website that allows the public to see DEQ reporting that affects Whitefish Lake and River? Is that possible? Is that an achievable thing?
So that's the water quality website that was recommended in Mr. Heberling's red marks. Again, that's up to Craig. If Public Works or another department is formed, right? I mean, it would be Craig or some other department that would have to design and monitor and to be perfectly honest, not being a genius, don't know of any city government that does that. Do you? Craig?
Is it
Well,
as
certain
simple as a link?
Except that I know city governments will put up the water quality of their drinking water. That's very common. You can go on and look at the water quality. I don't know the city websites. I know they could have a link. I don't know the city website for water quality of the municipal city. But I could be
Well,
wrong.
Cabo would,
Where few cities have Whitefish Lake inside the boundaries. And Whitefish Lake is very, very important to the people. And yeah, I suggested a city water quality website. And that's without knowing how difficult would it be to set it up and how difficult would it be to maintain it. But it's there as a general idea and it can be refined. But yeah, I think the city should dig into the files at DEQ and get everything that BN has reported there. In the Libby asbestos cases, we've got the DEQ files and the feds files on the railroad cleanup of asbestos. It was very difficult to get it all. So the public should know about this. They should have a place to look for it. But I don't know how big an ask that is to set up a website and try to list all this stuff.
I guess I just chime in. I think Alan made a really good point. Excuse me. We put it in our growth policy we need to do it, because the first thing that will arise during a lawsuit is you have to follow your growth policy. I think we need to balance that. The things that we say we're gonna do in the growth policy with the demands on staff and how much time we actually have to do that. I think that would be a huge undertaking. I mean, we probably have to hire, I can't imagine Craig's department has the time to go through.
Well, I mean, we partner with Whitefish Lake Institute, that has a website that it feels like that's the appropriate place. Let's put the, you know, the responsibility and the professionals that we hire and pay for on a daily basis. Right.
I know Mike Copel specifically said he recommended against us having a water quality website.
Right, but he didn't.
Yeah,
say
just
that
as
we
a
couldn't use
practical
theirs.
matter, if WLI is already doing it and doing all of it, that's fine. And, I think we need to, build in as much discretion in the city with regard to these objectives as possible, because we don't want to run into what Angie has pointed out, that it may be very expensive to set up something like this, but we need to make it an objective, but give the city some discretion on how to implement.
I think that in the city, the website, a simple link to the WLI water quality thing.
Something like improved visibility or access to DEQ water, because that could be one link. Something very broad, like improve or give access to. Does that make sense, Alan? Instead of creating a whole new website.
You know, we're going.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. I was.
Yeah, go ahead.
Again, we're kind of, what I'm hearing is we're kind of mixing apples and oranges. You're talking about specific things to meet goals or to meet objectives. Creating a website with it, that's not what this is about. What we're trying to do is come up with a goal. And our goal is we're going to improve, maintain water quality of all the lakes and streams. Okay, you got that. An objective or might be, in these circumstances, I think, ensure, take steps to clarify.
What about Whitefish will contract with Whitefish Lake Institute to do the monitoring?
No, that's a detail. Again, what's our goal here? And then what's our objective? Our objective is to improve monitoring of outfalls, water into lakes and streams.
And reporting to the public of that.
I don't even know that that's,
Improve the monitoring or just to make the data readily available?
yeah, or ensure,
Make
all,
the data
I think what we want to do is ensure that it's being done.
Yeah.
That's all we I mean, my concern is that, given our history around here, DEQ is not as on top of things as they need to be. We as a city have had to make them do their job in terms of monitoring and cleaning things up, because they just like sat on it. We've done that a couple of times. That isn't our responsibility to do it. But at the same time, if our water quality that we care about, so all we're saying is, ensure that the testing that is, what is it? I think what we want is some confidence that DEQ is doing their job.
It's almost like monitoring their monitoring.
Yeah, monitoring the monitor. I don't know how to, and I don't know whether that's fair or not, whether that's realistic, but that's what we're really talking about here, I think. It's just do what we can, set up systems that are gonna check or monitor, outfalls into Whitefish Lake, into Whitefish River within the city.
So now that we've come from not wanting to pigeonhole ourselves and be in legal trouble if we don't achieve, then we need to look at what Alan had written, what has been suggested, and find some medium between those that achieves what we've just talked about without opening legal doors
Right.
to challenges.
I mean, I don't really want to say coordinate with other agencies, because we're really not coordinating.
We want to allow transparency.
Yeah,
So people can see and say either they're not monitoring or it's not
without us having to actually report the results.
Mhm. Just give access to, make access readily available. Which I don't even know if readily available is the right language.
I don't even know if we can do that. It's just really hard to like formulate a way to say that we're gonna check and make sure they're doing it, but we're not going to report their data or, you know, analyze their data or any of that because we're not the experts on that. So, I mean, I think maybe if we go back to Alan's objective,
Which was what?
The low land maintenance service, yeah.
They would put up our regular, I mean, I could put up the red mark print, but, it specifically talks about this.
Can we do that and
Not
find,
good, but.
find that portion?
Which red mark print doesn't specifically talk about this, but sure.
The objective, just says, zero sedimentation and zero nutrient loading. The long objective that you read earlier.
So there's, I mean, here's the staff's version. Trying to incorporate as much as we could with what was suggested in talking to WLI. This is what they suggest, this is what they supported.
Which is,
Okay. What the additional stuff that we've red marked in is what WLI said is appropriate. That's what we're recommending.
Continue to partner with WLI.
And
To address
monitor
it.
water quality, identify and address source of contamination. I mean, that gives us something, but
okay.
I mean, again, I have no horse in the race. I'm just trying.
I get it.
I just, if I put it in here, we gotta do it. And Craig's close to retirement.
What?
He's in with.
Sir, I do have a question.
Yes, Phil.
Loon Lake is within city limits. Who's monitoring that? Is that part of WLI?
Who?
Loon Lake?
Yes,
Because that's adjacent to the golf course
I
on the
believe,
south end.
I believe they monitor them, like, don't they?
I don't know.
Who, WLI?
I do.
I thought they only monitor the lake, but
They,
I.
it's, yeah, it's, Loon Lake is part of the Lake Shore,
Protection regulations.
protection regulation. And water quality, I know that the golf course for years has done testing over there. They monitor on an annual basis, because I've actually gone out there and done their, you know, measured the lake and all that kind of stuff for them. So I know they do something. I don't know who's doing it.
With the, water, the amount of water decrease in Whitefish Lake at 20%, is that similar to what Loon Lake may have
We're down 2 feet this year.
on both Loon and Whitefish Lake?
I don't know about Whitefish Lake. I can tell you what Loon Lake's like. I was walking around there last night. So anyway, yeah, let's move on. What is,
So I mean, that identify, mitigate, or continue to partner with WLI to address and monitor water quality and identify and address source of contamination. I mean, that broad thing
that
covers
sort of
this.
covers it.
Yeah.
It seems to me.
Cause, you know, and how we actually do that, I think and we could certainly, you know, try to make sure
Yeah, I
that
mean,
DEQ and EPA are doing
Well,
their jobs,
that's-
but I don't know what power we'd have to make them do their jobs, you know?
I think that's where I'm concerned about the word ensures, because we don't have a regulatory arm to govern that, but I mean, if it's as simple as working with BNSF has an entire environmental staff. And they have reports that they have to submit on a monthly and annual basis. We can collect those. I'm just not sure if it's appropriate to put a link on our website to them.
The BNSFs.
Yeah.
Well, it's all,
I'd say more like-
public record. So, shouldn't be any problem.
So perhaps something on the end of that, like, and grant public access as available. Or, and provide public information as available. Because the goal is for the public and for the city, if we're not going to create a specific area. We already work with Whitefish Lake Institute, right? And basically what we're hearing is that no one is seeing BNSF reporting. It's going straight to DEQ. And unless somebody acts as a member of the public and digs or requests that information, no one knows. Is that right?
Yeah. It's fair.
So I think the objective under this goal is to have someone, whether that's WLI helping grant public access. This says monitor and what? So, yeah, provide public access to water quality
Goes
information.
by the book.
I think
By the way, say public, provide public access.
Water quality information when possible,
Where,
and when available.
Water quality. Oh, identify the source of inherent and provide public access to such information
Where feasible.
Usable or available.
where.
You could talk to Mike to see if that, he could link that on the WLI website, because that seems like that'd be more
I don't know
appropriate.
why he wouldn't be doing that.
it may be something he has.
But anyway.
They have the state of the ready to do it.
That they put up every year, I don't know how often they do
Yeah. Anyway. Okay. Okay, does that seem to address that issue?
Does that,
that's what it covers it.
We'll go through the.
okay, so we'll still keep that on the table to see if there's something that needs to be added. All right. Board discussion on this broadly, or do we want to get into specifically? The reason that we're going to go specifically through anything that's been suggested is because at the last city council, they said we should have gone line by line. So we'll go, it can be quick, it can be as slow as needs to be to kind of talk this through and figure out where we're headed, somewhere between suggested edits, public comment, staff report to get to something that everyone's happy with. Does that make sense to everyone? More line by line instead of a blanket whole, do we like this section or that section? Go through, and as anyone has suggestions, we can go through those. Okay, so if a board member has a suggestion on a specific part, now is your time to bring that up. We'll discuss it and then continue to move forward from there. Okay,
Okay, I guess it's a time that I could bring up my comments. And, they cover a lot of things that we've just discussed. So this is good. You can see what I did with it. Okay, I'm gonna hand out a copy of the red line to everybody. And it's got a lot of, right, I've been changing it lately and over the past few weeks.
Okay,
That's one for Alan. I only have 8 of these.
okay.
Toby?
That one.
Okay, I got one, so here's one extra.
do you want one?
That's for Mallory.
Yeah, I was
Oh,
gonna say,
yeah.
and Mallory is online. Mallory, chime in, raise your hand anytime you would like to add a comment. And we'll read things thoroughly enough, hopefully, that you can keep up and know where we are as we go through this. So just stop us as necessary, or if you have a comment.
Okay, so anybody online should have, what is called, so in the water quality section, you go to agenda, hit here for the documents, then water quality. Alan posted 4 documents. This one is called Proposed Water Quality Changes and WLI Correspondence. So that's the same thing that everybody at the table is looking at. So, beginning with the general goal, we have Alan's, maintain and improve goal. I called that a general goal. And then his objective is listed also. And then this, statement, continue to partner with Whitefish Lake Institute to address and monitor water quality and identify the sources of contamination. Okay, so
And we've just
That-
added to that
that's
together as a
fine.
group, correct?
We added to that and public access where feasible?
Yes.
Okay. So then I broke it out, instead of having just one general goal, I broke it out into sediments, nutrients, and storm drainage. So I have separate sections for those three goals. The first goal is about sediments, although I included other harmful pollutants into Whitefish Lake. So the first objective is to, I'll read it. The city of Whitefish shall obtain information on land development activities for the purpose of meeting the above goals. Okay, so I wonder, are we gonna, do you want to vote on each line as we discuss it? Is the concept of breaking it into three sections, nutrient sedimentation and storm drainage, is something I did. We could vote on that, or do you want to wait till later? How do you want to proceed?
I think it's good to look at if we're going to break it down, because if we say, no, we don't want to break it down, then that kind of shortens this or makes it a little bit different. I don't, so,
Some of these could be done at the end, I guess. Okay,
Yeah,
let me know if we should vote on something. So the first one is land development. To track land development activities for the purpose of meeting the above goals. And I added, track the effects of construction on water quality. So the concern here is sediments that would come down hillsides into Whitefish Lake. And this would be an objective to, the staff says that they already collect this information, but here we would place it in a center, the water quality data center, whatever, so that the amount of land disturbance on the hillsides can be compared to the water quality goals.
so I have a question, John, before we move on. Is the majority of this contingent on having a specific water quality website and water quality reporting apparatus? Does that make sense?
I referred to Water Quality Center. That could be a website. It would, what I imagine is a center, one of the planning staff would be responsible for water quality. And that person would gather all the information from outside sources. So that would be the place to look.
Okay, so I guess my first question with that is, does that, if we don't create that, is that an issue? And then what do we have that would already be that type of function without that name? Does that make sense? Is that Craig? Is that, who would be our water quality?
That would be WLI.
Yeah,
Okay,
Mention.
I think that's why WLI said we shouldn't do that. They're doing it.
okay,
Yeah, and later in the document, I say any function, any objective here that can be performed by, or is already being performed by WLI can stay with WLI, but we would have a person and a lot of documents gathered and an awareness in the city of what WLI is doing and how much land disturbance there is on the hillsides and so forth.
so how much of that is WLI already knowledgeable, if you have any idea? Is that something that they're already
I
gathering?
don't
or
think
is
they
this
have land
something-
disturbance maps or anything like that.
Okay, so this is basically to track new construction, land movement that's creating sediment as a separate thing from nutrients.
Right,
Okay,
This is on a project by project basis.
yeah, the information comes from building permits.
So we're putting a GIS together. I'm suggesting that we're tracking, we're mapping all this on a GIS. That's what you're suggesting.
While keeping the data, I don't know, I don't know how hard it is to map it.
And that's what it would be.
That would be-
Here, we would have a GIS project. What are we monitoring with the
The
disturbance?
amount of sediment being
The amount of
used from a
land
building site, which would be pretty tough to.
The city has very strict erosion control, construction site erosion control ordinances that we require included in every site or permit isn't approved. Building inspectors are on site regularly monitoring that, public works employees are on site monitoring, what's happening in the public right of way, but I think to assume that every building permit is tracked and monitored and reported on a website is way too far reaching for, the current staff for the guy. I mean, we're basically, I think, would be adding a water quality website staff.
I think
A
that's
water
the
quality
hard,
specialist.
And you would have to hire like a geologist or biologist or, right?
Well, let me ask you this. Currently, and everybody, how will we measure the impact on water quality that construction going forward generates?
I mean, if you ask Mike Kupel, you talk about non-point pollution, right? Which is there's multiple sources that come in that are very difficult to identify. Because you have to check it at the lake or at the end of an outfall. But there's no way to know for sure, where those different points are coming into it specifically.
Isn't that our MS4?
Well,
I
not
mean, that's-
necessarily.
that's the problem.
It's a different thing, but, when they Whitefish Lake Institute went out and monitored the lake, they found different areas where they had contaminants, but unless there's specifically something that they could find, like Line Mountain was a pretty obvious one, but there's other ones that are non-point where, we're finding these things in the lake, but we don't really know where they're coming from. And when it comes to sediment, there's definitely times, like when, Tom Thomas's property had the big washout and a bunch of sediment went down into Whitefish Lake. There's been a couple other ones of those around the lake. I mean, those things are fairly obvious. On most building projects, there might be a rainstorm, obviously we require straw wattles, we require different erosion control stuff. Every once in a while, somebody kicks over a bale or something, like a little bit of water gets through. But, most of the time, if it's a major one, we're on top of that and we're able to see that. But, there are times where, a big rain event, even the best of that stuff's gonna fail a little bit because just the water's gonna go everywhere, right?
maybe
So
we,
how do you pin that on one property owner, or how do you make sure that, just the monitoring for sediment, like citywide and all the building permits on that kind of a scale is very, very, very difficult thing to do. But, we have policy in place to try to protect that and make sure that people put up the proper stuff to make sure that when it does have a storm event, that, the minimal amount of, sediment contamination come through. I don't know how we could monitor.
maybe we should, limit this tracking to, sites with slopes over 10%. That would eliminate a lot of them. Because obviously we don't want to monitor every building permit, no. But
I hear what you're saying, John. I guess my rhetorical question with this is, these are more implementations, strategies, and very detailed and specific as to how we're going to accomplish these goals or an objective. I think it is, and we need to have that discussion at some point. But that's when the discussion about how we accomplish these things, these goals, we have that when we start talking about implementing it and creating the regulations and whether or not, this is, I would, again, what I'm reading here is we need to separate the document of the goals with what we're going to do, because we haven't decided how we're going to, as a policy matter, how we're going to implement that goal or that objective or whatever the objective is. And it may require us to say, through argument and discussion, the only way we can do this and we want to do it, we're gonna authorize a staff member, or we're gonna authorize, a new, whatever it is. But that's in the implementation phase, not in, at least in my view, not something we need in the growth policy to get to that discussion. Because I think this could be part and parcel of, okay, we think this is the goal, and we think that some of the things we need to consider are these, we can put those off to the side as legislative recommendations for when we talk about implementing it, what we thought those possibilities would be. But again, that's the way I organize it in my mind. And again, given the parameters of what the growth policy is, we need to consider all of those things, but maybe not at this phase. All those implementations of what we want to accomplish here are really about what regulations we put in place to support that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not,
I
it's a
think you have an
timeliness issue.
important point.
Yeah,
And this point, I'd like to read from the Montana Growth Policy Handbook.
right.
It says, too often, at page 2, too often growth policies and other planning documents provide large amounts of data and analysis, but contain little clear or concrete guidance about how to improve a city or town. Because of this, growth policies and other plans can often result in few visible improvements. This can be due to the fact that the growth policy was either not realistic or its guidance language was so vague that the community leaders and residents were unsure what was supposed to be done. Then they define objectives as the objectives are the strategies or steps that would be used to achieve the goals in the growth policy. Unlike goals, objectives should be more specific, it says much more specific and measurable. So how specific do we get? That's
The
a
question.
good question.
That's the question. Yeah.
So I don't want to be too specific, but this is just 5 pages in a document that's going to be hundreds of pages. So I think 5 pages on water quality might be appropriate. And so it's a bit specific and we can shave this and shave that as we wish.
Yeah, from my perspective, because of the, I'll call it, for lack of a better term, debacle with the economic development chapter that we went through, with seeing the goals and objectives multiple times at multiple meetings, and then requesting after a draft was put out, requesting from, stakeholders to give their comments and then coming back. I think it makes sense to do more input and more work on the goals and objectives so that by the time the draft is coming out, it can encompass that. I don't think it means that everything specifically we're talking about right now has to stay in the goals and objectives, but I do think it's a good time to raise these things so that by the time the actual draft comes out, it can reflect what we've talked about with goals and objectives. I think we can narrow them as we go, but keep these details in mind or keep them somewhere. Does that make sense, Alan, in your writing world? Or how can we
I'm
best?
struggling because again, we looked at the recommendations and talked to WLI about what we could realistically put in there. So, I mean, we could cycle back, but we've already gone through all these and said either we can't do this, we don't have the resources, it's not what we do, we don't do websites, we don't do scientific monitoring. Mike agreed with us. So, I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult. We're trying to figure this out and we put what we could in there. But if we're, so asking me to redo it or to rework it, we did, and we talked to the experts. So, beyond this, I guess you can add things that aren't recommended by WLI or us. That's where you can go. But what we have is what is recommended by us, WLI, and 13 different agencies. So if you want to add more, you can. Not in my purview.
Here, I think we're talking about the margins between science and policy. So this planning board is doing a growth policy, so we talk about policies. And my impression from speaking to Mike was that he prefers to be the advisory scientist and not to be telling the city what to do about policy. These are a bunch of choices that I made. These are not Mike Kupol's. This is not on Whitefish Lake Institute stationery, put it that way. So what is science and what is policy? I don't think we are demanding much science in here. I'm trying to avoid that. The city would have no monitoring in the sense of making tests, just monitoring in the sense of tracking information that others obtain. So that's where I'm trying to draw the line.
Right.
I guess the question is, has someone obtained a sediment load or sediment gathering from construction? So requiring that, do we want to go so far with the growth policy because this is for 2045, right? So we're looking far ahead and preserving and protecting water, which I looked back through some of the first visioning sessions where, you know, we had really broad questions to ask. What, you know, what is unique about Whitefish, Joy? And some of the most often commented things were the lake, the rivers, natural resources, and clean water. Some of the things that one thing people said they wanted more of was environmental regulations. So if this is to be a document to reflect those visioning sessions, and then also what we as a board have heard, I think we may be more specific than staff or WLI want to be. And if that's the direction the board wants to go, that's why we'll vote. Then that's the direction that we'll go, knowing that writing the draft, Alan, now you'll have more information on which direction to go instead of really vague goals and objectives, and then being hit with a draft that says things that you've never seen before. So in my mind, it makes more sense to have these conversations now with goals and objectives than waiting for Alan to write a draft and then rewriting a draft. So I'm open to hearing all of this, and I'm also open to saying that's not feasible. We'll be legally challenged immediately if we say that. So, but I guess I'm not understanding completely the timeline of when this is implemented. If we say we would like to have someone monitoring sediment levels, at what point, you know, can a group come in and say, you're not monitoring well enough? And how do we protect ourselves from that? How do we ensure that we are maintaining and improving water quality, but not opening ourselves to lawsuits immediately? Because I would like to do the maximum to protect in this growth policy.
I guess like, and just for mine, but I go back to what Alan always said at the beginning of these sessions, which the growth policy is a regulatory document. And when we enact zoning regulations, when we enact other regulations, we go to the growth policy for guidance. So if one of our goals, just extremely general goal, right, is to protect water quality. If we're implementing a regulation, we'll go back to the growth policy. How does this regulation satisfy the growth policy? So, I mean, I totally understand wanting to protect the environment as much as possible, and I commend this group for, you know, the thought you've given to this. But it is, again, a regulatory document that we will come back to when we enact other regulations that are more specific to what we're trying to accomplish in protecting the environment. So I guess that's the guidance I would give.
I would suggest maybe slightly different take on it. And growth policies aren't regulatory guidance. But what they do is provide the legal nexus between the policy goals and provide a legal basis for land use regulation.
Well, I know, but the Montana Supreme Court has said they're regulatory documents, understanding that that's what they do. So, I mean, you have to comply with them, but I think in light of the growth policy, you're looking at the broader picture. And again, if you guys want to, I'm like, I don't have a horse in this race. If you guys want to get very specific, my caution is if you don't do that, it's going to come back and haunt you in some way, shape, or form. Exactly as you said, Whitney. What if somebody comes in and says, okay, you say you're gonna monitor sediment, you're not doing a good enough job, or you're just not doing it.
But I want us to know by the same, you know, other side of the coin, that once this is done and because it's my understanding that then we're just out of the picture, off to go splash in the lake and build homes and create sediment. So I want to know that somebody is looking at what's happening with BNSF, looking at what's happening with construction. And it doesn't have to be in this policy, something, you know, completely specific, but I want it to be specific enough to have some teeth,
Madam
to
Chair?
hold this.
You know, I want to get away from the, you know, there is this idea that this is it, right? And after this, we're done, but that's not true. This is what drives all of our regulations, our work programs, our policies, so, water quality regulations. The idea that once the growth policy is done, we lose all control isn't true.
No, not you, us.
Well, you too, because regulations, zoning, water quality all come to you, don't they, before they go to the council?
Anything in the zoning code, that gets
Right.
implemented, not necessarily stuff in the public works
To the
engineering
board
side,
first.
but I mean,
It was my understanding that we would kind of, once this is complete, what is the role of our board?
The regulate, like when we did the landscape code, when I worked on the landscape code 3 years ago, the landscape code came to the planning commission first, and you worked on, there were several work sessions where you made comments on the landscape code, which is how we implemented one part of it, and then it eventually went to the council, so the regulations, the work programs, those things, well, not the work programs, but the regulations will come in front of you. So this is only the big picture driving what the more specific things are in the future.
What about things like that come now before the Board of Adjustment? Would that continue?
absolutely. Variances,
So variances,
yeah, there'll be other things that come before you guys, but
Yeah, you guys kind of are the board of adjustment right now. So I don't think that this is the end of the
Right.
process, for better or for worse.
The difference with-
Help them look at it.
The difference with MRUPA is that after this and the regulations are done, when the regulations are done, the regulations have to allow by right processing, right? So the zoning, instead of having conditional, it really comes down to having conditional uses. The idea of conditional uses goes away and things have to be by right. Stop me if I'm wrong, Angie.
Right.
But all the regulatory things, nothing changes. The difference with MLUPA is the conditional uses go away. Basically, right?
And possibly PUDs as well.
And possibly P, that's the difference. Right, but everything else is still the same, building permits, regulations, that all is the same. It's just a conditional use, public hearing for specific uses is what goes away.
So, and that's why when the zoning regulations come to you guys after the growth policy is done, you'll really have the opportunity or the responsibility, depending on how you look at it, to craft those in a way that will give the city what they want when a project comes in. Because right now, of course, we're looking at a CUP, a PUD, individually, but I mean, that will be something that you guys will have the opportunity to do, is to craft those zoning regulations in a way, to protect, well, the environment, protect people's personal property rights. So that's that, you're not at the end yet.
Thanks for that clarification.
another thing to
Okay,
think about is, the growth policy is a big document. There'll be multiple chapters that have goals and policies and implementation items. And there'll be a long list of implementation items, and it's a 20-year plan, so I mean, obviously they'll be prioritized on the ones that need to get done first, but some things may not get implemented for many, many years. I mean, even our existing growth policies, there's things that, are just getting implemented or even haven't been because they were a low priority and a lot of other things going on. Obviously, there's a bunch of stuff that are the priority things that get implemented. So whenever there's a goals and policy and implementation thing, it just depends on the budget. The city council is willing to do things, whether or not we have staff to do them. There's a lot of factors that go into the implementation and things get implemented.
That's why I've been trying to stave off this idea that after this happens, we're gonna lose control of where development happens, for instance. But that's all a factor of zoning, right? Where you and the council are gonna decide where land uses are distributed and what types. That comes after this. This just has a general goal saying development should be compatible with your surrounding neighborhood. And then when we craft the zoning regulations, we're working on trying to figure out how to do that. I think that's sort of example.
It's just easy to get sidetracked in the detail of things, but we're really trying to stay 100-foot view, big picture. Looking at, we all agree on the goal, we want to protect the water quality, and we get, argue about the details of what we can or can't do as a city. This is our city growth policy, is what, city staff can do and what the council can do and what's within our legal right and ability to do under law, different laws, federal laws, state laws. And so we have to figure out what's our responsibility, what other agencies can do, what other outside things like Whitefish Lake Institute, how we can partner them. Maybe we can look at ways to, encourage additional funding for Whitefish Lake Institute to continue to monitor things. Those are the types of things that are achievable. Trying to monitor the amount of sediment that comes off of every construction site in the city, that is not an achievable thing that we can do and anyone could do, any city can do. Very
Okay, I
difficult.
think I could solve the monitoring or tracking of land development problem first of all, limit it to, sites over 1%. And change shall to may, so the city of Whitefish may obtain information on development activities on sites over 10%. So as long as it's a may, the city has full discretion, no lawsuit is possible. So I think that takes care of it.
And then I
And
guess,
also, I'm dubious of any connection between sediment caused on a hillside above Whitefish Lake up on Big Mountain, say, and connecting that to the sediment that actually goes into the lake. That seems difficult to connect up. It would be difficult to prove in court. So I'm dubious about this, but I think it's important to make some kind of tracking of land disturbance on the hillsides.
Again, from a say practical matter, you understand that 95% of the hillsides that drop in to the Whitefish Lake are not within the city of Whitefish. I can't do anything about that. The city can't do, and we don't even have, that's not even an option. Even if we wanted, it's not an option. And we come, and so in terms of our growth policy with respect to the city of Whitefish, I would probably agree with you if, given that we don't have hillsides that directly drop into the city of into the lake per se, really don't.
After the annexation, you might, right?
Annexation of what?
Big Mountain.
I think that's pretty distant in terms of where sediment could come off of the mountain.
That's the problem. So maybe we should just strike this section, you know? Seems to be causing problems.
Yeah,
And I'm here to be practical.
no, I am, I get it, and I get the concern. I guess again, we're talking about implementation of a goal, which is to identify and mitigate styptic leachate and other contaminants into the Whitefish Lake. And upper Whitefish.
When you say strike this section, you're saying strike the whole water quality section? Because if that's the case,
No.
then
No, just,
The proposed.
3A.
Well, after looking over this, both John's and what we've got, I think that what we have here, there's 16 objectives written out there. They pretty much cover all relevant circumstances. And to me, beyond that is getting into weed detail. And once you start getting into details, in certain cases, you're gonna find one, they're gonna miss another one over here, miss one there. And I think that this John's document here is going to turn a what is a 2-page document of objectives into a 7, 8, or 10-page document of objectives that are gonna be so focused that
Oh,
it's
I
gonna
guess,
be difficult.
and I don't know what is the, I don't have. What John's presented here is food for future actions, in my view. How do we codify this so that, or accompany this with, okay, in conjunction with these goals, these are things we ought, this group thought we ought to consider as ways to possibly implement, or something to that effect, so that at least we don't lose this without having to incorporate it directly into the growth policy. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
it makes sense. I mean, again, I guess it would come down to implementation, right?
Right, no, but what I'm suggesting is assume with me, if you will, that we agree that, okay, these goals and objectives, as you outlined here, yours is perfect. What we want, or what I'm hearing is, because a lot of this stuff, I think, is implementing stuff that is theoretically part of these goals, but it's their implementation, so they're for further actions in terms of creating zoning and regulations to implement these things. It seems to me we ought to have these things somehow available when we begin to consider action items to implement these goals and objectives. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, on the detailed stuff, I mean, you know, if you look through the Alan's comments, you know, specifically item by item on John's comments, you know, we outlined the things that we could implement into here as a goal and objective and things that are out of our purview. But, you know, some of the more detailed things, I mean, I think that's one of the things that we'll have to come up with as we, you know, complete these chapters, are what are the implementation items? That's something the board's gonna work on, and like how are there specific things that we can, you know, we'll
Okay,
obviously
so
have a
that's
list
a
of
separate
suggestions.
discussion.
Yeah, that's not,
It's a separate action thing that when this is done, I hope,
yeah,
right?
Then we'll come back.
We'll be coming to you with a chart of implementation, who, short-term, medium-term, long-term, who are the entities that are responsible for this and what goals it's relating to.
The action plan.
That will be, yes, so this is our big picture, and then there'll be a chart probably with implementation that you're all saying, this is what we're gonna do,
Okay,
right?
much more detailed, and it's just, but until we get nailed down the goals and objectives, we can't even begin to put that together. We're not gonna spend our time on that, so.
and I guess I heard what you were saying, John, with the growth policy or the prior, and I had this discussion with Scott today. It's like, okay, I understand where they were coming from, saying it was, those things were way too general to figure out where they're going. I don't think we could argue that these are way too general, that nobody understands what we're talking about. And certainly if we accompany that with the action items or the implementation suggestions that we will get an opportunity to tabulate, I think that's probably a better way for us to ensure. Given the growth policies the other growth policy I've looked at, this is better. This is way better, more specific. It's more clear what we're talking about, what we want to get done. It's not amorphous. And I'm not reading it that way. But, and certainly once we get an opportunity to create a separate set of action items or suggested action items to implement this, I think that's where this all comes back in terms of ensuring that it goes forward, that we don't lose it, or there's no question about what the legislative history is.
As I've been writing this, and you know, you can look at the community plans for other communities and see like kind of pointless goals. Continue to work with blah, 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 right? As I've been writing this, because I've been on both sides, I've been long range and current planning, so notice like implementing. As I've been writing this, I've been trying to stay away from those kind of statements and make them specific enough that it's saying that we're going to do something. We just haven't specified what that is yet, but I've been trying very hard to not do those way overly general statements and saying, this is what we want to do. And when I can, I give little laundry lists. Here's some examples of what we're doing.
Yeah.
For exactly that reason.
No,
So we're looking ahead 20 years, and this is a living document. Water quality. We don't know what's gonna happen 5 years from now. For example, last year, the golf course consumed 35 million gallons of water from the lake. And the year before, it was 10% more. Was the fertilizer consistent between the 2 years, and what about the fallout? Who's measuring that? Has it increased, decreased? These are the variables that we have to consider all, 5, 10 years down the road. We don't know. So we have backup plans just for that reason.
And also remember, when we say 20-year plan, it's a 20-year plan, but we're required to review it every 5 years. And right now, the way that I wrote it, because it's going with the other plan, it says 3 years. So by the time we've got this and the implementation done and all that, we're back here. I just got like
and this
kind of stutter.
be part of that.
We're doing this again,
Yeah.
right? I mean, this is kind of a continuous.
That's why I say it's a living document. It's gonna be changing because of the environment.
So it's not one and done, and that term doesn't work here.
So after this discussion, sorry, I want to say this quickly and then I don't want to say that none of what you've done should be incorporated into the objections. Objectives, because I think there may be some things that are specific that should be incorporated. So I would like to quickly go through. And that way we know that's pushed to an action item later, everybody agrees, or that's something we all care deeply about and want it as an objective. Specify, like we just added a little bit to a phrase that Alan had. Now it's more comprehensive, now it has more teeth, and we can move on. So I don't think just because some of these are specific, that we should discount and say, wait, because somewhere between goals and objectives and drafts and action items, we're gonna have to have these discussions. And I would just rather do it now with it in front of us on goals and objectives than later after we miss it or we go a completely different direction because we haven't talked about it. So do you guys want to take a vote on whether we go through this more specifically, or can everyone just say yes or no? Are you guys happy to keep going through?
I guess I'll offer this predicate. At least we have to take one policy, I think the way to move forward is take the current staff recommended objectives lists that we've got here and all, they go all the way through. Are there things from John's redraft or reorganization that we can fit in here that makes sense?
That makes sense. Yeah.
If there are, great. If there aren't, on these, we decided, but we have to figure out, rather than reorganizing the objectives, I think we got to start with one draft to the other. I think the one next to start is, let's deal with this, the Allen's draft or current draft,
And incorporate.
and incorporate anything that's from here that can fit, or add another goal if we want to, but I think that'll be a way to get us to move forward. So, you know, if sedimentation is an issue, okay, where do we talk about sedimentation here or something like that, or do we add the word sedimentation that we're gonna monitor that? I mean, that's kind of the way I think we could move forward, but we have to start, I think we gotta start with the current draft and add to it, as opposed to a complete rewrite, and try to figure out, okay, do we want to do it this way or do we want to do it that way?
Okay.
That's
It's not either.
right. No, I think
It's a vote.
and for that matter, if we decided we wanted to start with this, you know, this base that John put together, that would be fair, but then we gotta figure out how to get everything that's in the current draft or see what, make sure it's addressed. So my preference is, at least the way I've operated with documents from here to city council, is we start with this one, what needs to be changed in city draft that gets whatever we missed, or theoretically missed, it's there, that can we put in it? I think that's a better way to work through it. Okay, are we okay with A? Yes, okay, are we okay with B? Well, I'd like to add, yeah, that's the way I do, that would be my approach to it. And I think that's the way we could work through it. We can't go section by section if we're not talking about the same section.
Okay, so we have the staff version and we're all pretty familiar with that.
Right.
And at some point, it seems like we need to go through my list of things that we might
Sure,
add
where do you
to
want-
it.
where do you
And
want-
it
where
is-
do you
This
want-
is structured as adding to the staff version, although I did divide it into sediments, nutrients, and storm drain.
Right.
So there are three categories under which we see objectives. But ultimately, I think we need to discuss each of these and see what we come up with.
Right.
And it may take some time.
Yeah, so you start with the first thing and then we'll refer back to the staff draft and then also to your proposed and
Well-
come together.
Yeah, these are just additions to the staff draft.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so. B, the city of Whitefish may perform scientific studies and data gathering as authorized by city council. That's a may never happen, may never be funded. So I don't, suppose that's very controversial. The next one is important, threats. So sites and activities identified as threats to Whitefish Lake or Whitefish River shall be monitored. And if violations are detected, enforcement action, I changed it to may take place. So, monitored. Instead, monitored implies taking samples, and so let's say tracked,
Okay, sorry, I'm a little bit,
we're at 3D.
so. If we are, we're looking at your 3D
That's
and that
what Al did.
that would correspond to what on the staff draft?
Well, the staff draft goes,
To-
you'll notice that the next 3 pages are all red. So there are things I added. And then the staff draft has 7 things at the end, or 8 things at the end. So the whole middle was added.
So the staff draft originally had one goal and
16.
A through P. of
No. Are you referring to the one that's like all marked up with my comments all over it?
Yeah, your comments in
Actually
the
draft one goal and about the policies.
Yeah,
Objective.
so the reason why is because the first objective says no land maintenance or land disturbance project shall cause soil erosion, chemical contamination, sedimentation, nutrient loading, stormwater discharge. So that takes care of the nutrients for septic, sedimentation, and then all the rest of these goals. We're just breaking it into different sections. It's not a deal killer, but that's not the way all the rest of the formatting of this plan has worked. We're already addressing all those things, and then we're listing general objectives of how we do that. So we don't quite understand why we're breaking it up, because much of what we have was duplicative. It's already there. Like, we're also don't want to make this overly complicated. It's already there. Right? I mean, I guess you can break it up, but it's, again, doesn't format with anything else in the growth policy, then we want to go back, I guess, and start reformatting everything else.
I don't think at all it means that we need to reformat everything else. I think it means, do we want to think of the water quality section as 3 separate ways to protect water quality? Or do we want to think of it as one goal of water quality and objectives under that? I can see both sides for writing, especially I can see wanting one goal and objectives to obtain that. Cause you want one goal for water quality, and that's to have good water quality, right?
I think that sorry to interrupt you, Madam Chair.
No, that,
I think everything we wrote captures what we believe we can. The stuff that we didn't add here, we believe either we should do it or we can't do it, like monitoring 303 compliance. That's a federal issue. It's not something we can do.
but you could monitor.
We have the providing public access, but a perfect example is identifying threats to whitefish and violations are detected, enforcement actions shall take place. We don't have jurisdiction over the lake. How are we gonna do that? How are we gonna enforce it? We can enforce our building permits if somebody is not complying with their building permits and they're not doing their water quality, we already enforce that. But if we've got a 2-stroke engine and the lake is dropping gas in there, how do we enforce that?
Well, I think we're not talking about enforcement anymore, right? What we're talking about is, identifying, my whole concern here boils down to one thing. Is, if we have some kind of a baseline for the water quality of Whitefish Lake, that against which we can measure, the impacts of, call it growth, not by point source or anything else, but cumulatively. If we can monitor the changes in the lake that are a result from, activity, and doesn't seem to be anything in here that requires us to do that.
What Pacific Institute does that on an annual basis.
But
And they publish it. Okay, and there's a recommendation in there to continue to work with.
do we contract with them for that?
That's why I'm saying much of this is duplicative. It's either we're already doing it or we can't do it.
Right. I guess I'm kind of stuck on is that, again, your objective A seems to capsulize what our goal is said, our policy is, which is, it shall be policy license that no land maintenance or land disturbance, public or private, shall cause soil erosion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's our policy.
I have to Google Castle License.
That's no idea what that word even is.
That's just way too vague. There is no connection between that statement and, septic leaching going into the lake. In the mind of a citizen who's trying to figure out this, you can't draw any kind of conclusion from the general, goal. There have to be objectives showing how we get there. As
So-
we did that, should be much more specific.
Identify,
and measured.
mitigate septic
Yeah,
leachate.
we did have an objective, so nutrient is basically what mostly, well, not always, but we actually added a specific objective about identifying and mitigating septic leachate contamination. Right, that's a new goal that we added from your draft.
Yeah,
What?
and I have a section on that, which we haven't gotten to, but,
And much of that section is out of our purview because of the county.
no, if septic leachate is coming into Whitefish Lake from Lion Mountain, that's a water pollution trespass. The city can bring an action, and if it chose to, the city is not helpless. It would be expensive, and certainly it should be within the discretion of the council, but the city can act. And likewise, if somebody's polluting the lake from a boat out on the lake, and the city is in the lakes, the lake is in the city's boundaries, seems like something could be done there.
The answer is, we do not have the authority. Fish, Wildlife and Parks has the authority over the surface of that lake. We've incorporated the floor of the lake, not the water in the lake.
Yeah, state owns the waters.
Yeah.
But this is activity on top of the water. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah,
Just to complicate it more, we actually only control the shoreline, DNRC, that's the lake bottom.
all right,
So
so
it's DNRC. and Fish, Wildlife, Sure. On the lake. We can only control what happens on shoreline.
Yeah.
Only to the high water mark over the ground.
Between the low and high
It's
water?
in City limits because we annexed it, but we have no control. I mean, and DNRC made that very clear to us way back before my time when we annexed. It's still ours, what they said.
okay,
So essentially what your comments are wanting to do and what I think all of us want to do is have transparent and open communication between these regulatory bodies and the city and any enforcement mechanism. So the more specific objectives are reaching to identify how we would know that there's a water pollutant, sediment, nutrient, and then also to identify the body that would enforce. So how do we know and how do we enforce? And now it's a policy question of, do we want that to be in the goals and objectives, or is that something that we discuss and then it gets kicked down to the draft and the action items? I feel like that's where we are. Do we need this in
seems fair.
objectives?
Great summary, Vicky.
And I appreciate that you have put it in one spot and have now, we have to make that choice. Is this something that we want to say, Alan, thank you for writing very generally, and we would like to be more specific? Or do we say we have the specifics part of them now, and we will contain those in one spot and deal with them later. So what is the idea of the board? Can we have some general comments on, do we want to continue to be specific in these objectives?
Well, I go for being more specific, but abbreviating. And, now with the land development monitoring, we ran into a lot of practical problems. Don't want this to be impractical, but I think we should be a bit more specific, abbreviate it a bit, and, keep these as objectives.
The other thing that I think about, if they are in there, we talked about having whatever this board recommends to staff as guidance, separable in a way that's visually easy for the council when they review this to say, these were board suggestions, these were staff suggestions, so that there's a basis for dialogue about what the city council wants to do ultimately.
That's a good point. So it needs to be something you can look at one and look at the other and not say, I'm so confused about bubbles and red line. So I think that's what this comes down to. How do we present what we want to present to city council that makes sense for them, so they can decide, yes, we like this. You guys went line by line and we appreciate that, or this is a mess and we don't go through it. We choose,
In other words, we don't want a rubber stamp, so.
exactly. And so that's why we are going line by line, but it does become into the weeds to go line by line, keeping in mind that we also have the staff report in front of us.
And we also added a bunch of John's stuff in there, those B through E are all things that came out of his comments.
Yeah.
That we incorporated into the draft. Or Alan did,
Oh,
so I mean, the best that we could, and we haven't really gone over those in specifics, but they cover a lot of the things that his concerns were.
And likewise, in the last week or so, I've seen several things on this red line that I put okay about. So we'll get to those, maybe.
Do you want us to finish stepping through these?
I'll try to go, well, next one is the Water Quality Information Center. We talked about that. I don't propose that it be onerous, maybe it should be rewritten, but the last line, as I changed it, the city may rely on the Whitefish Lake Institute if the WLI performs any function in these water quality objectives. So that means for the whole document, the city may rely on WLI if it already is doing what is an objective here.
I like that addition. I think it's a given. I think it helps with any legal issues where people say the city didn't do that, and we can go back and say WLI was already doing it.
This may rely, is that an objective? I mean, just in how we word objectives. That's the only thing I have a question about. We already have some stuff in there. It says continue to partner with Whitefish Lake Institute to address and monitor water quality, identify and address sources of contamination. To me, that covers that. When it comes to, and what we added to the previous goal about information, I mean, I think covers that as well. But I mean, we're just trying to eliminate redundancies.
Right. My reading of that, my immediate, lawyer in me said, continue to partner with Whitefish Lake Institute or other entities. So that we don't have to rely just on them. We can rely on others, or we can partner with somebody else.
Yeah, they might back down after you.
Yes, so I say continue to partner with or other entities, to address and monitor. I mean, I think that would be, okay, that's something we can do. It's general enough, and I think it addresses some of that. Anyway, if I were.
Flathead Lakers or whatever, I mean,
Exactly.
tires or whatever, yeah.
I, on a personal level, I would propose that we amend section B or add to section B, continue to partner with Whitefish Lake Institute or other, or other entities, to address and monitor. I think that,
Okay, so the next one is E, on the next page, city may request funds to perform studies in furtherance of the above goals. These objectives do not require the city to analyze water samples or conduct scientific studies. So maybe this, my thought was that maybe the city could get funds that Whitefish Lake Institute might not be able to get to. So this is another may, it's discretionary with the city. They may request funds. So
that
then,
became anyway, so.
We can already do that, though. We can go to council and say, hey, the council wants us to do something, and then we ask for the funds, right?
Right,
We already
Talk
do that.
about grants.
We can already, if the council decides they wanna study something, we could get a grant, or we can allocate the money in the budget to do that.
so should we tell the public that this is available in the form of an objective? If not, I can strike.
so you're suggesting that the objective be that the city should look for and search out grants for funding, is that what you're
May
suggesting?
To
request
protect
funds.
the water quality.
Yeah,
Okay. We can request, that's not a question. What I understand you're saying is a goal might be, or an objective might be that the city direct the city seek out such funds as federal or other funds that might be available to assist in the study or monitoring of.
so we should say should request? I just left it as may.
Yeah.
May, yeah, may cover, it allows it. All right. So next one is, City of Whitefish shall track.
Where are we with that? Sorry, I'm interrupting.
If we're gonna, do we want to add that?
Adding some sort of objective, if they are, please tell me what it is.
I didn't understand.
He,
I missed,
he wants to define,
Before we move on to the next thing, it sounded like you were going down.
the city may request or may seek funds.
I'm putting it up here on the screen, so I'll rewrite it however you want, if that's what you wanna do.
So we can add this as objective as reworded? Is that the question?
Or I don't know if there's a place in
I was
there.
adding a new objective.
Yeah.
Yes,
well, it's, we're rewording the one at the top of page 9.
to add as a new
Page nine
objective.
of what? Your page nine?
This, yeah.
Second
Yeah.
page.
The continue to partner with.
The
Whitefish
nine-
Lake Down.
No, so the
No.
city may request funds, so it's E on the, it's numbered page 9. I mean, it's not page 9, but it's numbered page 9 on this red line draft. The very top.
It's the green on the left.
I don't know.
Right, I see that. I'm trying to,
I wish we had a copy of this without the comments on the side and they.
okay, well, this is,
Redlined and better.
So this is here, I've already written this up. And I have like our version, I have two versions. I have his version red marked as a separate version. I can just copy and paste stuff over. Right? And so that right there, now I'll put into this document is as we wrote it, if we want to change that.
It is the city seek funds to perform study.
Dana's raising her hand. I'm gonna let her speak.
Hi, guys. I just want to be clear, this is something that deals with our city finances. And if you're putting it in this section, you need to put the same language in every section. We might be seeking grant funding. So I get worried about putting something about seeking funds or grant funding just in one section, because it might lead to believe when we get to hazards, say fire mitigation, we already have our mitigation plan that says we're going to be looking for grant funding. Are you going to put something about this in all sections where we would potentially need grant funding to get the objectives done? And so I just want to give that input that when it comes to the financing of how to complete the goals, we need to be consistent in all sections if we're going to add something about funding.
Good point.
So
That
can we
makes sense.
kind of put a place marker, placeholder in here and say, add language about funding per this section? So I don't know what that would be for every section, but if we're going to put some funding, the city may seek funding to, like, that could be the last item objective of every section. The city may seek funding to further these objectives, but is not bound to
So when you be a cut
Something.
and paste under here, at the bottom of every section.
exactly specific to that section. But I don't think we have to figure out that wording right now. Maybe better if we don't figure it out for every section now.
I guess my concern is that we already can, regardless of whether or not it's
Yeah.
objective. I mean, it's kind of repetitive to say the city may seek grant funding for the environment, for fire mitigation, for what, I mean, we can do that anyway. So I guess it's like, again, how, that's always gonna be a city objective. For anything, like David said, for any of these chapters, it's always gonna be a city objective to seek grant funding or other types of funding to fulfill our goals. So I guess that's just my concern. I guess there's no harm in putting in there. It just
But then
doesn't.
again, you're saying it's duplicative.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
What's it get us? Is what I'm saying. I'm trying, I mean, we're back to where I was responding to what Frank said, is I'm trying to have stuff that's objective and then stuff that realistically we could do. But there's certain things, it's like, what does it get us, right? And I
What
think,
was your hope?
what does it get us, right? We can only do
Yes.
that.
Well, it raises awareness and, increases a sense of importance of water quality. So there's all these things that we can do, are a demonstration to the public that, yeah, the city is really interested in water quality and we can do this, and this. And yes, I guess this section is done elsewhere, but nobody knows that. So it's good to put it in there for the public purpose. So this growth policy, really does seem to emphasize water quality. It's more emphasis than anything else, I suppose.
It's a positive emphasis. It doesn't point out a problem. I mean, that's part of the tone of the growth policy, right? These are opportunities. At least that was,
When you, and lawyers in this room know this, if you're inclusive, that means you're exclusive. So by mentioning it as inclusive, you're also excluding things we might otherwise do. So I don't particularly think. I think that the statement, continue to partner with Whitefish Lake Institute and other entities to address and monitor water quality. That in and of itself says that we're committed to this thing, and partner with, that means seek funding, seek assistance, so. I think it says there, if you want to say, continue to partner with and others, including looking for or, grant funding or federal government funding, again, that's given to what we do is for a living around here. And always have, quite frankly. So, but yeah, like
Right, was that given to the citizenry? They assume that, or do they need to be informed of that?
it's a good point.
I mean, that's something we could have in the narrative.
Yeah,
People are reading that rather than the goals and objectives. We're really trying to avoid redundancy and.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't, okay, and to address Dana's point, maybe we put that in the preamble that.
Yeah.
To.
City will continue to look at goals.
We will
Yeah.
seek funding from it, whatever level we can to assist in these things. That way it covers everybody and then,
Yes.
it covers the whole thing. And that would be, on the funding issue, might be something I would certainly think would handle it. I don't,
well, it also sounds very positive.
we could even, the alternatives is if we do it at the beginning or at it covers all sections. That's easy. Otherwise, we have to be pretty meticulous about adding it to every single section. That's my only. That's my only.
In preamble.
Right.
Yeah, so what you're saying is, we pull it out of this section, just put it in some sort of a preamble for that.
Right.
Yeah.
For the whole thing is in the whole growth policy.
Right.
Yes,
As something that the city will endeavor to do with respect to all of these all goals, objectives. We will, as usual, not just rely on city taxpayers, we will look for other ways to fund, whatever language makes sense. So that the public would know if that's something we do as a regular
keep
course
that,
of business anyway.
keep that in your library of things to add later.
So we've dealt with that. Okay, what's the next one we got?
City of Whitefish shall track 303D compliance. We talked about that. This is just obtaining the records relating to it. And I think the middle part could be eliminated to make it shorter. And then the last sentence is a report on the facts leading to the listings and probable sources shall be prepared. I've heard a lot of information on PCBs in the lake, but it'd be good to have a report on what is known about the probable sources. A serious matter, we should have a report somewhere. Maybe it's been done already.
Do you have any information on that? If it's somewhere in the DEQ website that we can link to, similarly to linking to reporting for BNSF or any of that?
The Whitefish Lake has to do
I
that.
don't know that they sample for contaminants like PCBs.
Would they, that's
PCBs
probably
are
wouldn't
also
complain.
Basically produced by dry cleaners. I'm not aware of any dry cleaner. We get.
Well, didn't it come from the railroad? Builds over the years? I don't know.
Well, you creosote, I mean, I don't know, but
There was some of that in the groundwater, they did some of the soil testing in the railway district, because there was old laundries in there and stuff, but.
it seems to me like we shouldn't be getting a complete free ride on the Whitefish Lake Institute either, or for additional requests. And I don't know much about what the contract we have with them is. But so, I mean, some of these monitoring activities, if we called them out for the Whitefish Lake Institute, I'm sure that if it was part of their contract, they would, if it had called for additional monitoring, they could do it.
Again, that's an implementation. I think the idea, we're gonna continue to partner with the Whitefish Lake Institute and other entities to address and monitor quality and identify and address sources of contamination. Kind of covers the waterfront.
It really doesn't, as the members of the public who read it and can't connect that general statement with PCBs. We need to have something,
Okay.
one sentence on PCBs maybe,
Well, then,
but
add,
let's add it to the awareness.
but then we're, okay, I'm drafting. Continue to identify and address sources of contamination, including, but not limited to, PCBs, and give me 5 others,
Or such as PCBs.
including but not limited to, language would work, I think would satisfy, rather than having a whole separate section identifying, okay, we're gonna do this, and this.
Well,
If you want to identify PCBs, that's fine.
this is 5 pages on water quality.
Right.
I think water quality is worth that.
Well, it is, but if you understand, again,
I'm happy to rewrite and
Fine.
restart.
all I'm suggesting, John, is that many of these things are the devil's in the details. What we're trying to do now is get some items here that we can follow up with the details on. And so, at least the way I read it, again, we're trying to craft a directional, general document so that we understand what we need. And so I think it would be perfectly appropriate for us to simply add to the end of Alan's B here, including but not limited to PCBs or whatever else you wanted, or fireworks or anything else you wanted to add to that in terms of what we're gonna do is we're gonna partner with people to continue to monitor that.
Well, we don't know what's gonna be a pollutant 5 years from now.
Including but not limited. to.
Yes, exactly.
That's my suggestion in terms of addressing that, incorporating it in short order in here.
So to add that to Alan's B.
Yeah, we have a big dialogue about PCBs in the chapter in the beginning of this.
Okay.
So we talk about, you know, how it's not listed and PCBs are a source, all in the background data on this.
Right.
You know, and that's why we have a general goal, because there's all kinds of different contaminants in the lake.
Right.
They're all talked about in the body of the chapter. You know, I don't know that we need to maybe put them all back in that thing, because that contaminants covers all of those different things without having to specifically call them out. When we have a whole thing here that talks all about that PCB section. That's a paragraph long. That's in the growth policy. It's the specific
not an
detail.
object-
I mean, that's where.
Right? I mean, it's not an objective. It's a bunch of information, which is
The
not,
objective is to address the contaminants and identify them.
Yeah. but
Well,
we-
the city of Whitefish shall track
think so.
303D
No, I-
compliance. That's obtaining documents, which maybe the Whitefish city does not have at this time. So,
Yeah, that are all,
That's EPA.
we're stepping on the EPA now.
no, there's the Freedom of Information Act. These are all public records. Anybody can request them, and our lake is important. We should request them.
So
Yeah.
that, I guess that the nexus here of, do we have a water quality site that would list all of this, or do we not? That's what's happening with a lot of these things, is in the beginning, we talked about having a totally separate water quality site or department. And now if we're not gonna move toward that, then how do we say list, or where do we list, or can we incorporate that language of PCBs into B and then make it cohesive without listing everything, like such as but not limited to? Is that sufficient, or do we need a separate objective on that?
Well, I think a separate objective would be for the city of Whitefish to track 303D compliance. That's separate. It's a separate activity. Requests to the federal government for records, maintaining those records, making them public somehow. So I see it as separate.
Separate. So I guess from the city's perspective, asking the city of Whitefish to do that, saying that the city of Whitefish will do that, is that feasible? Is that something that is achievable to us?
Question. I mean, most of this, 90% of this is gonna fall on Craig, right?
I won't keep saying that, but.
When you
I
retire?
have a lake also comes entirely public works. But yeah, I mean, an annual data request to EPA. And put it on the website, I mean, yeah, that's not
Not difficult.
super overreaching.
Okay.
It's just, you know, once it's in the report, then.
Not gonna be as easy as it seems, though. I mean, again, if you guys want that as a objective, whatever, I think it's fine, realizing that it might not get done, because we might not have the staff time to do it.
Okay, I guess that's the big disconnect, is like, once a year, it's not that hard, and then it might not get done, so that's where we need to meet on this. If we're gonna write it, then it'll have to get done.
Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of what we want. If we put it as an objective, we're saying, this is important, we want it to get done, make it happen. So that's why we're going through this. But at the same time, asking, is that something that is at all possible? Is it something that will be listed on a website reflecting what the EPA has provided, or is it a link to a search through the EPA? You know, something so easy.
Yeah, that's,
Okay.
actually,
Yeah,
you know, I mean, I think just requesting all the records from the EPA, does it sound easy? No, it's not gonna be easy, it's gonna be time consuming, and again, if that's what you guys want, that's fine, but you have to realize that, everybody knows that city has limited resources. And what all the things we want done, in any realm, are not when you get done, because we have to allocate our resources. So I think you guys have to decide too, what's really important to you guys.
Yeah.
What do you really want done? Would it be nice to have it done? Yes. But you kind of have to, part what is feasible for city staff as we are staffed. And realize that, you know, the more staff we add, more taxpayer dollars they spend. So I think it's just a delicate balance for you guys.
Yeah, this
Tracking what
is.
you truly want. I mean, the whole thing's a delicate balance.
Yeah, and remembering that this is a draft of goals and objectives.
Yeah.
And I would much rather us include something now and then as we come into the draft, say, that's not feasible, we've looked into it, we have to remove it. But I think it's better to include it now than not and lose it somewhere.
Yeah.
In the ether of what was that thing that we kind of wanted but forgot. So I would say leave that for now, Alan, that's my thinking.
Leave what?
Leave the language about PCBs but I think you said the first sentence and the last sentence is what,
I don't have.
Are we saying, that we're saying such as, we're saying monitor and identify and address sources of contamination such as PCBs, is that what you're saying? Up here,
They're not modifying the goal.
such as PCBs,
Or other,
like that.
Or contaminants as defined here and above, if you wanna do it that way.
Is what I've highlighted here, is that what we're talking about?
I think what John is saying is that we keep F as an objective,
section, yeah,
a section separate and not modify it as Frank suggested.
not added to B.
Not added to B. That Whitney says if we include that in, that's not final, we can come back and visit that if we need to.
The tracking 303, so you're saying as written.
The first sentence of F and the
This-
last sentence of F.
First and last sentence of F. Right, so we try pasting that in.
Who's that?
John's F.
John's F.
So. let's see. Okay. So the track, okay,
And then in B, you can eliminate.
so like that,
Yes,
that's what we're saying?
yes.
We should see
But
that.
now, do we need the part about the PCBs in the previous letter B?
Probably not.
So we're talking about here,
303D compliance with regard to what?
Yeah, so just leave it at.
Generally, it's all 303 compliance citywide, every instance of that. I mean, that's a pretty vague. Really specific to Whitefish Lake water quality.
And what I crossed out, I was
River.
referring to PCBs and oil and grease. So
The-
that's what they're out of
Timber
compliance
site,
for.
is it? BNSF's other sites around the city where they have contamination?
Well, it says PCB Lake is not compliant for PCBs and mercury. And Whitefish River is not compliant for PCBs and oil and grease. So that sentence is why that objective would be there. Without that sentence, that chunk of the middle of the F, it seems like, why would we care about 303? But then once, we're not in compliance on this.
Goals, something that encapsulates something we already talked about.
Yeah,
The lake and PCBs.
so that's
But
mentioned.
not to re-educate on the goal, it should be general. that
Yeah, no.
refers Back to it.
I think the first and last
Structure.
sentence is good. The way it
Well,
was.
specific to what has to probably somehow have some language that refers back to that, because who knows how many different 303 contamination things are citywide. I mean, I don't know what EPA's got. But might not just be the water in the lake.
Might be nice to know.
I mean, there's a lot of
If
old
we're out-
gas stations. and things
We're
like
out of
that.
compliance on a lot of
Yeah, a
that.
lot of stuff's been kept.
right, can we track 303 compliance? How does that work?
I don't know, I haven't done it. Again, it's an EPA regulation, it's not something the city regulates, so I'm sure I could talk to somebody at EPA and figure out how to get this report on an annual basis, but
There's a lot of sites, once you cap it, put concrete or asphalt over it, then they no longer monitor it or do anything, but that's
As
a
I'm,
mitigation method, having dealt with brownfield and things.
as I'm reading this thing, a 303D listed water is a body of water determined to be impaired or threatened by the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. In other words, 303D is just referring to a body of
Body
water,
of water that's impaired.
yeah, but it doesn't say how much impairment.
well, it depends. There's a whole list of TMDLs, total maximum daily loads that
Yeah, let's
the
list further.
EPA creates and the states are then required to enforce. And so PCBs are one TMDL.
Yeah.
You know, it's anything from nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen to polychlorinated and biphenyls. Haven't been made in a long time, but they stay in the ground forever, so.
So it is essentially what we're trying to do is make the Whitefish Lake and the river not 303D listed water.
That's the goal. The objective is to track it and to have a report available so that people know,
That says it.
and by people, the public
Okay.
and people who can
Yeah, all right.
help do
And we
something
can
about it.
simplify it by just tracking 303D non-compliant. Just the ones where it's out of compliance. Not track everything.
So that's something that potentially we can look into, see how possible to create either a link or some type of, maybe it's a spreadsheet that you can download quarterly or something. See if that's possible. If it's not, then we revamp this objective a bit and say, make available instead of track and report. Okay,
That sounds
so-
good to me.
All right, let's take a couple of minutes break, because now we've been here 2 hours. Just a few minutes, and then, we'll come back.
So, just so I'm clear with what we're stopping on, we're going to add an additional objective
To Allen's
to Allen's
from John's. There
from
was
John,
F on Allen's.
and it's gonna say effectively the city shall
Yes,
track 303D compliance,
exactly.
Non-compliance.
non-compliant.
All right, so we'll stop there
All right.
for a few minutes, and then we'll come back, reconvene,
Cool.
and finish up this, and then move on to hazards and fire.
John, you checked into the hazards department?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you all.
So you guys, I have like an analogy in my head, and maybe it's wrong. But when I talk about goals and objectives. I would think my goal is to, be a healthier Scott, right? And then objectives would be walk 10,000 steps as a way,
Implementation. But,
well,
so I mean, your goal would be, or your objective would be like,
You got any paint you wanna
Exercise. develop exercise routines to become healthier. And then the implementation would be go down top 10,000 steps, because that's much more specific. So the objective is just a general way to accomplish the goal, but it's not the specific way to accomplish it. For the overall, I mean, the objective, you know, the overall goal is to be healthier. Then objective would be, here's one, like diet, exercise, and whatever,
yeah,
you know, and little general objectives about that. The implementation would be how many times you're gonna, how many steps you're gonna do, or how many, what kind of food you're gonna eat, or whatever, but. So I mean, it's you can't get too specific in the stuff, because it isn't regular, but regulatory. But the objectives are things that the city can do to accomplish these things.
Right, and
So
so,
in the
I mean,
practical
that's,
things that we aren't doing, that we can do, you don't wanna be redundant on the things you're already doing. You wanna do the things that you're not doing, that are practical and are achievable,
right,
and that's the bottom line, and, you know, that's where we, you know, staff, we're trying to stay away from doing things like where we're, you know, telling the county what to do, or telling
yeah.
federal government what to do, or telling DEQ what to do. We can't control
No.
that stuff. We can only control what the city can do. And that's why we have objections to some of the goals and objectives that specifically have us monitoring other agencies, which we have no power or control over.
Well, and I understand that, and I, you know, so I'm trying to, you know, clarify, you know, my impression with, you know, your professional interpretation and approach,
It's expensive.
right? So what I read in this manual, growth manual, which is potentially outdated, but it says, you know, that, the growth policy is a document